Hello, this is Dr. Ahmed Abdelal from Bridgewater State University, and this class is based on GILAM 2016, Intro to Communication Sciences and Disorders. So today we're going to speak about developmental speech disorders. We're going to speak about aspects of articulation and phonology. We'll speak about speech sound disorders and also the relationship between phonology and speech. So the question about articulation and phonology is an old question, and nowadays we call the disorders that have to do with speech sounds, we call them speech sound disorders, as these are classified as communication disorders are classified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So you will find that speech sound disorder is just the diagnostic label that is used to describe difficulty with speech sounds. So we'll speak about how to evaluate and how to treat these disorders. The one aspect, just in order to enable you to understand how speech is formed. In order to produce speech, you have to build phonological representations of the sounds that you hear in the brain. So the baby spends months and years listening to sounds of the native language, listening to words, listening to sentences. Even before the baby is born, 4 months before birth, the baby is able to distinguish particular characteristics and features of speech because of listening to the mother all the time. So by 7 months of after birth, when the baby is 7 months old, the baby has established the phonological representations of the sound of the native language in the brain. The baby is able to distinguish between one sound and another, not just in the native language, but in any language basically. But by the time the baby reaches 11 months, then he or she is able to they focus mostly on the native language. When they hear sounds from another language, they do not pay attention to them, and they're just as if the other language is noise. So this shows that the networks in the brain that are dedicated to phonological processing and language processing, these are already dedicated to the native language, and then they don't focus much on another language. Of course, the baby can learn up to 5 languages, but they have to be given consistently, and the baby has to have access to a native speaker of that language who regularly communicates with the baby. But generally, listening to a sound leads to vibrations in the eardrum. These vibrations are eventually carried they become vibrations of the bones in the middle ear. And these vibrations from the bones go to become vibrations in the fluid inside of the inner ear. And these vibrations inside of the inner ear, so they go like this and that, they cause bending of certain structures in the cochlea called hair cells. These hair cells are the endings that lead to neurons that make up our auditory system, our auditory nerve. So these hair cells, once they move, they fire a signal. When they fire a signal now, the acoustic wave that came through the air is finally translated into a certain number of electrical impulses that the brain keeps a pattern of. And when these electrical impulses are fire in the same sequence, the person remembers the word, the person remembers the sound of the word, the sounds of the word, and the person can activate this same firing to send it to the muscles, to move the muscles in the same way to reproduce the sound that he or she heard. So we call these sounds that are stored in the brain basically phonological representations. It means the code, the firing code that's associated with particular sounds. Each sound has its own distinctive codes of firing, and these codes then enable the person to have the template for moving the muscles of the face and the larynx and breathing and so on to produce a particular sound or a particular word. So the smallest sound in a language is called the phoneme. The smallest sound in a language, smallest sound unit, I mean the minimal sound unit that if you take out of a word can change the meaning and the structure of the word, that becomes a phoneme. Like if you say cat, if you take the t out and put instead of it, then you have a new word. If you take the k at the beginning of cat and put it becomes mat, then you have a different word. So again, a phoneme is the smallest phonological unit in the language that distinguishes one word from another. The conveying meaning is not really a characteristic of phonemes. So that is not accurate. Let me correct it right there. That is not the smallest sound unit. Okay. That discriminates one word from another. So we have a situation where you have two words that are different only in one single sound. Maybe at the end, maybe at the beginning, maybe somewhere in the middle. So for example, if you say Pam and Pat, these two, the only difference is that one sound at the end. We call them minimal pairs. Minimal pairs. Sorry. So these minimal pairs are two words. Each pair is two words that are different in one phoneme. Like if you say light versus white, these are a minimal pair. Fay, ray, minimal pair. So cat, bat, minimal pair. Sometimes called minimally contrastive word pairs. They are important. We use them for treatment. So for example, a phoneme, again, it's a sound. It can be a vowel, it can be a consonant. So phonemes combine together to form syllables, and the syllable can take the shape of a consonant plus vowel, or vowel plus consonant, or consonant, vowel, consonant. As you say, for example, the first one, consonant, vowel, pa, or ma. Vowel, consonant, up. Consonant, vowel, consonant, pop, for example. So these, when we look at the consonant structures or the word structure, in phonetics, we look at the initial word position, the first sound of the word. or the middle, or the end. That we say, does the sound occur at the beginning of the word, in the initial word position, in the medial word position, or in the final word position? I wanted to also mention something about a syllable. The only basic requirement of the syllable is that it must have a vowel. We call that vowel the nucleus. So one syllable can consist only of a vowel of the nucleus. When you say, I saw a cat. So a is a vowel by itself. It is one syllable by itself. For example, say, I am alone. A is a syllable. Lone is another syllable. It's when you say above, a is a syllable by itself, and then above is another syllable. So the syllable can be a single vowel, or it can come as a vowel preceded by a number of consonants at the beginning, 1, 2, or 3, like spring, spring. And then is the vowel, is the nucleus, and then is a consonant coming after. So that's the situation where you can have a nucleus, a vowel, and a 1 or 3 up to 3 consonants at the beginning, or like spa. So, or you could also have a vowel and 1, 2, or 3 consonants at the end, as you say, for example, even. Actually, that's 2 syllables. For example, if you say al, for example, al, a, and then one consonant coming at the end. You can, so it can be one consonant or more, or you can have one nucleus, one vowel that has a number of consonants at the beginning and the number of consonants at the end, and that could be a syllable that has the consonant, vowel, consonant situation. And when we speak about syllables, we only focus on what we hear. We do not focus on what we write based on phonetics and phonology. So the phonological representations of sounds is complete by age 11 months, just when the baby is just ready exactly to say the first word. Now, when is phonological development complete? The question has to do with when do children become able to produce words and sounds accurately at a specific age, for example. So basically, by the end of the 7th year, by the beginning of the 8th year, they must be able to say all the sounds in the language. And recall that there are 43 phonemes in the English language, 43. So each, particularly consonants, they have specific ages in which they emerge. So this aspect of phonology has to do with the rules that we use in the language to sequence particular phonemes together to make a syllable. And there are acceptable rules in every language, and there are rules that are not admissible. For example, in English, you cannot put a p and then f together. You can say the spelling, but we do not care about the spelling here. Phonology cares about what you hear. So when you say Pfizer, you don't say the p, so you end up reducing that. and just making it into one F. Philosophy, PH, becomes one single sound. So the rules that have to do with sequencing words sounds into syllables and particular patterns, that is the aspect of phonology. Articulation. So phonology is mostly here in the mind, the phonological representations of sounds in the brain. And when that is mature enough, that becomes a template to activate the muscles of speech. And these templates can be translated like you click on to print a document. You have to connect the computer or whatever to the printer. And so the template inside of the printer, inside of the computer, the software then becomes the source of the hard copy that you hold in your hand. So articulation is more the muscular aspect that is driven by the mental representations of these sounds. So this is a friendly chart, kind of looking at when particular sounds emerge, or by what time particular sounds should be mastered by approximately 70% of children. So by age 3 years, these sounds should be all in the system. And you notice even in babbling, because p, b, b, n, w, h, all of these are present definitely by age 3. And then age 4, you have these, and 5 and 6 and 7. So definitely by the end of the 7th year, you have the production completely accurate for all sounds. And by 8, the beginning of the 8th year, then that should be, all these sounds should be there. When a child who is supposed to have, say, a number of sounds by age 3 years, doesn't have these sounds, for example, by 4 years of age, then there is a speech sound delay. The delay is not classified as a disorder, but when we speak about disorders, it really doesn't distinguish when for billing purposes and so on. It's just called speech sound disorder because the line between developmental and disorder becomes blurred. So a delay generally has to, for the delay, the child makes mistakes making the sound, but these errors that the child makes are similar to the way normally developing children make mistakes. For example, a child who, at a young age, who doesn't yet have the ability to say the will make it as a wa. So instead of right, they say white. So a child who's 2 years old was likely to do that because they do not have the R. If you go back here, you notice that the R emerges, should be mastered by age 6 years. So a child who's, 2 or 3 is not going to have the R sound. And most likely they will say wa or ya. So in that case, when the child reaches 6 years and doesn't have that R, say by 6.5, for example, 7, and doesn't have the R accurate, but still says it as a younger child, then that becomes developmental. There's a video here that shows cases. Please watch these videos. I don't want to play them here, just to conserve some time. And then a disorder, a speech sound disorder, that is the official name of the disorder. It's called speech sound disorder, beginning from 2013. So the disorder is basically more severe. The children in that case make multiple errors that can involve like multiple errors in the same word. And we call that phonological processes. And I'll explain to what these mean. don't worry about the distinction between a phonological disorder and an articulation disorder. Nowadays, there is no distinction. In the past, before 2013, the disorder was called phonological and articulation disorder. So that the distinction now is not there. However, when we speak about phonology, you always speak about what's happening in the brain. And if the sound representations are stored in the brain, when you speak about articulation, you focus more on the production, the motor production of the sounds. And without phonological representations, you will not be able to articulate. For example, children, someone who is born without hearing, they can't produce speech at all because they do not have these sound representations which you build only through hearing. So we said children who have a disorder involving speech sounds, they mostly have what is called a phonological process, which is basically, I'll simply explain it. It is a simplified form of a word that the child cannot say. So for whatever reason, the child cannot say car, or cannot say, for example, doggy. The child might say doggy, or might say, for example, gaga or goggy, for example. So that becomes, in that case, a phonological process. It has different kinds, different, types of phonological processes. For example, one is called cluster reduction. I'd like you to know examples of these so you can answer questions about this. Cluster is it is two or more consonants that are together, occurring together with no vowel in between. So when you say spoon, sp, this is a cluster. Two consonants together without a vowel in between. When you say spring, spr, sp, spr, this is a cluster. So when you take out one sound of the cluster, drop it, that becomes a cluster reduction. You reduce the number of the consonants in that cluster. So instead of saying try, you drop the it becomes tie. Banana, you drop a whole syllable and you make it nana. Dog becomes da, for example. So so weak syllable deletion involves deletion of a whole syllable that is weak. So as in banana. So banana. The second syllable here, actually the second one is emphasized. Is the most emphasized syllable of the word. We call it a stressed syllable. So that means the first syllable before it is not stressed. It is weak. So that means that that syllable is deleted. Instead of banana, you say nana. Dog, that is when it is produced as da, that is a final consonant deletion. It means the final consonant of the word is deleted simply. Cat, ka, car, ka. So final consonant deletion is typically a problem that many children with hearing problems, middle ear infections or hearing loss, have difficulty with final consonants because these consonants tend to be weaker, they tend to be softer and harder to hear. They are higher pitch. Then speaking about omission, again, don't worry about the distinction, phonological versus articulation. Don't worry about that. Just know this as speech sound disorder. And, these are things, patterns of errors that might occur. There are other ones that you will study in phonetics. So omission, it simply involves dropping a sound. So when you say, for example, car, no, car is difficult. When you say cat, it becomes ka. When you say book, it becomes bo. So you drop one consonant. For example, say Sam. Instead of Sam, say am. Or, so omitting one sound. Substitution is omitting a sound and putting another one instead of it. So instead of say Sam, the child might say tham. Instead of saying, for example, fun, the child must say bun. Instead of saying mat, the child must say mac. So taking a sound, replacing it with another sound. White becomes, for example, right becomes white. Light might become yite, for example. So again, make sure to be able to give examples of these phonological processes and of these articulation errors types. Whenever we do diagnose any kind of communication disorder, we have to focus on the severity. It is the rating. How severe is that disorder? So, and in your textbook, there are examples and particular explanations about the severity. Generally, severity or a disorder can be a mild disorder, can be a moderate, or it can be severe. And there are two other categories. It can be mild to moderate or moderate to severe. So the severity is determined based on the number of sounds that are produced correctly. For example, if someone has a couple of, sound errors like l, and these sounds, basically the person will have a mild speech sound disorder, and people can generally understand the speech. Severity also has to do with the accuracy of production and the ability to make the sound, for example, at the beginning, middle, and end, as a child or, who has difficulty saying, for example, k sound at the beginning of the word, at the end of the word, and in the middle. Anywhere it comes, the child just doesn't say the k, says maybe makes it a t, for example. That becomes, we call it consistent error. That means at the beginning, middle, and end, just every time you have a k, the child makes it a t. As in car becomes t, tar. So another aspect that is important for determining severity is the ability to make the sounds in sequence. For example, so if the child just, substitutes a sound or makes simple omissions, that doesn't compromise intelligibility of the speech as much as, for example, when they have multiple errors in the word. So also, severity has to do with the extent to which the speech of the person is understood by others. We call this intelligibility. So we say, what is his or her intelligibility rating, for example? To what extent are they intelligible to parents and to siblings and to familiar people who see the child every day and they are familiar? For example, teachers who are familiar with the way the child speaks. These people generally can understand the child more than someone who doesn't know the child as well. So we ask, how intelligible is the speech of the child to family members, and how intelligible is it to unfamiliar conversational partners? So because the person who doesn't know the child doesn't have any idea, that is not going to be able to understand certain things as much as the ones who are familiar with the person. So if the person is not, the speech is not very familiar, I mean, is not intelligible to family members, that means that is that's a severe problem. If it's intelligible most of the time to family members, it most likely is going to be unintelligible a lot to non-family members. It could be moderately, the intelligibility may be moderately decreased or severely decreased. So a mild speech sound disorder is characterized by certain aspects. For example, the number of errors is less. And usually the errors involve a few words, for example, that occur, for example, later, a little bit later than usual. So simple substitutions like sh, for example, th, s, z, l, r, j. For example, the child might make errors like these. Generally, they can be intelligible for the most part, and especially to their family members, and also to unfamiliar speakers. You can fill in what is missing. Moderate speech sound disorders, or a moderate speech sound disorder, has these characteristics. So generally, the child will have a problem with the whole category of sounds. In phonetics, we categorize the sounds into families, and these the sounds in each family are closely related. So if a child has difficulty with one sound, most likely they will have other difficulties with the whole category. For example, if a child has difficulty with the k, g, they also might have a difficulty with the because all of these are produced with the soft palate, with the velum. So a child might have difficulty with any final consonant at the end of the word. They just drop that consonant. That is a generalized pattern. A child might, for example, produce a sound incorrectly at the end of a particular word, wherever it comes at the end of a word. Like, say, pod becomes pot. And every time they get the at the end of the word, they change it to a t. Cluster reduction, like blue becomes boo, spoon becomes boon, poon. Spring might become sing. So multiple errors involved in the same word. And also the person may be intelligible to friends and family for the most part, but generally unintelligible to unfamiliar listeners. So that's the moderate. So I'd like you to know the distinguishing features of moderate sound disorders compared to mild sound disorders. And then this has a good prognosis. Prognosis means your prediction for recovery. How do you think the outcome of treatment is going to be? Is it going to be positive? Is it going to be excellent, good? Is it going to be guarded? Means like really there is not going to be too much room for improvement, and so on. So prognosis. So it is, even though the prognosis is good, the child will improve. However, that is going to take a longer time with the severity. The child might take months or years. Severe sound disorders are characterized by the following. Speech is unintelligible to most listeners, including the family members themselves. Typically more than 6 sounds, for example, involving sounds, and these occur in all positions of the word. Like a child might say th as in thumb, might say it as thumb. Every time you have the th, the child just makes it as an f. Every time the child says v, the child makes it as a b, for example, no matter where it occurs. And there's no sequencing in the sounds. For example, hopsital could be hopsa, or hostapa. The child may heavily rely on gestures in order to communicate. So there's an important note here. Before age 12, before the child is able to say the first word, the child should use gestures. And that's a good sign that the child is focusing on the meaning of the language that he or she is producing. Now, then once they start speaking and saying the first word and they go to second year, third year, fourth year, and so on of their lives, 6th year, 7, they should be using words. They don't need to use lots of gestures. So when a child is using lots of gestures at a later age, after 2 years, for example, that means that the child has speech sound problems, or most likely that that the child doesn't have enough language, doesn't have the sounds completely consolidated. As a result, he or she augments with gestures. So that's a big sign. Most of the time, children with hearing loss do that. So these are examples of, for example, mild, moderate to severe problems. For let's take the same word and say, how will a child with a mild sound disorder produce the word, and versus moderate versus severe, for example. That's from a 4-year-old. So the word soup, that's the way that you write it down. This is the way you transcribe it in phonetics. So soup, a child with mild speech sound disorder, they might just make it as soup, for example. That's soup. Because remember, mild, it involves a couple, just a few sounds. Moderate, the child might, instead of saying soup, the child could say toop. So then the severe could say it as tu. So you notice now, this child with a severe problem did 2 things. Took out the p at the end. That's the final consonant deletion. And instead of this at the beginning, the child substituted that with a t. So it became more complex than the moderate. So it became t. It became unrecognizable. If you do not know what the child is talking about, like you have a bowl of soup and the child points and says tu, you are not going to understand what the child says. So this one, rabbit, a child with a mild disorder probably will say wabbit. Easy. Even in cartoons, they make fun of it because it's a developmental thing. Moderate, they're going to say, for example, wapt. Say here, the vowel is taken out, for example. Or wabi. The transcription here, all of this is phonetic transcription. But look at the severe one. It became So, or for example. Apostrophe here means So again, it becomes unrecognizable because of multiple errors in the same word. This one is low. It became yawo, and this became wowo, and this became o. So crayon became quayan, or actually qualan, and then killan, and then illa. So you could see easily that the severity has to do a lot with intelligibility and with the multiple phonological errors, multiple errors are involved in the same word. So in terms of how the bilingualism and dialects affect production, we have a situation, for example, where the sound patterns have an effect, say the sound patterns of a native language have an effect on the language that is being learned. So, for example, in the Chinese language, they don't have an R. Instead, they have a sound that is between the O and the R. We are not going to be able to produce it. So, for the R, speakers might not even recognize it. They might put an L instead of the R. So, ring could be said as ling. Or maybe even drop it. The sound, the nature of the sounds in a particular language will have an impact on how you speak, say the sounds in the new language that you are learning. So, for example, in Spanish, for example, they would say ch instead of chicken. They just make it simplified into chicken. 10 could become 10, because there in English it has two sounds, and I, and in Spanish only one sound. The same as in Arabic. The Arabic language, you don't have the I and the distinguished. So, for example, the word sick could become sek, or the word, for example, a bed could be made as bid. Bed, the distinction becomes unfamiliar, familiar to people from the Arabic language, so they do it this way. Bed can be confused. So again, the characteristics of the native language of a person could have an influence in making the person say a particular sound in the in English, for example, based on how they speak their native language. So the native language can interfere with the sound patterns of the second language that is being learned by the person. We call that language interference. So now we want to kind of discuss why speech sounds occur. The etiology means the cause, the study of the cause of disorders. As I mentioned before, speech sounds, there is no way on earth that you can make a speech sound if you do not hear it many thousands of times over an extended period of time. Once you hear the sound over and over and over, the nervous system makes the vibrations associated with that sound. It makes it translates it into a firing pattern that will match exactly the number of vibrations and the sequence of these vibrations for every individual sound. And we call these phonological representations. With these representations, when they are mature enough, when these networks can fire quickly and efficiently, when you hear the word, you activate, you know the sounds and can recognize them. When you remember the sounds and you can activate the muscles to reproduce that sound based exactly on what you have here. If the person doesn't have that mature enough, they will have phonological problems. A lot of these problems hearing problems occur early in life. For example, age 18 months is an age where there's a peak in middle ear infections and a peak in adenoid problems and tonsil problems. And all of this, children are vulnerable, more vulnerable than other times for middle ear infections, for example. Another stage in their life when they are vulnerable is between 5 years and 5.5, just because of the growth of the facial plate and how the eustachian tube, develops, and all of this. That is going to have an effect on their hearing will interfere with the way that they are acquiring the sound. Now, by the time they come to you in the primary school or first grade, for example, or kindergarten, many of their middle ear infections would have been resolved a long time ago. When you check, there are no middle ear infections. And then yet the child has speech sound problems, and you don't have the middle ear infections to point and say, oh, this is caused by that. The fact is that the consequence of the middle ear infections lingers, and nothing is going to fill in the gaps if you do not fill the gaps. So this is why we find a lot of these speech sound problems, and we just say unknown cause. But if you dig down and really think, the cause has to do a lot with hearing problems that occurred at an early age and that resolved much longer before the child came to you, much earlier. So, most of the problems occur, again, due to perceptual problems because of the hearing impairments, maybe middle ear infections, which is called otitis media, or sensorineural hearing loss, that is permanent hearing loss, that is in the inner ear. Also, there can, in some cases, speech sound problems can occur as a result of anatomic problems or structural problems, as in cleft lip and palate, for example. Typically, excuse me. Typically, children with cleft lip and palate, and more than 30% of them have abnormalities in the eustachian tube that basically leads to hearing problems and a conductive hearing loss. And in some cases there are also, but mostly conductive hearing loss. So these problems, in addition to the structure itself of the soft palate itself, and the structure of the lips and all of this, that can also be a cause. People are born with cleft lip and palate, and that's why we call that prenatal etiology. And then there are motor etiologies, for example, like someone has a paralysis, for example, or dysarthria, which is generalized muscular weakness, for example. Or someone might have apraxia of speech. We are going to study apraxia individually in a different video when we speak about motor disorders. So what do we do for evaluation, to assess or to evaluate speech, to find out if the person has a speech sound disorder? Basically, we get a case history, like when you go to a doctor's office, they give you paperwork to fill, about your history. For example, how old are you? For the child, for example, what kind of medications does the child take? Did the child experience head injury? This and that. It's an extensive case history. And then you listen to the child speaking naturally on conversation, record, and then listen to particular words and particular sounds the child cannot make, and write down how the child said them, Sometimes we need a tape recorder. And then we have a number of tests that we give the individual. You kind of, any test targets or shows pictures of words and that have a particular sound in 3 positions. Let's say the k sound. So to put the k at the beginning, you find the picture of a car and say to the person, what do you see? They say k, car. If they say it k, then you write it down, transcribe it, means they have said it correctly. And then ba, k. Did they say the k accurately at the end? And then, for example, they say icky or echo. We don't focus on spelling here, but the k is in the word echo. So that comes at the middle of the word. So you listen, every sound is tested in 3 positions, on the single word level and on the conversational speech level. And then you try to find out what probably could be the reason the child has this problem. And then if you don't find the reason, then you can just say it's unknown and you proceed with the treatment anyways, to target the particular sounds that the child cannot make. You list them, say they cannot make these sounds, say for example, either in all word positions or at the beginning only or in the middle only and so on. Typically, when the speech sound the speech sound that is produced incorrectly is said in one word position but not the other, we call that inconsistent. Say for example, the child says the R when he or she says right, they can say it at the beginning, right, but they can't say it at the end. Car or carpenter. So that doesn't make it particularly a concern, because if they can say it at the beginning or the middle, then they are generalizing the sound. The sound is emerging if they are able to produce it 50% of the time in conversational speech. And as a matter of fact, usually it's a criterion for release from treatment. If once the person is able to produce the sound accurately in 50% of the time during speech, then they are ready to be discharged. We'll of course look and examine the oral structures and inside and out, and have them do basic exercises to look at neurological functioning. We look at the results of hearing screening. Speech language pathologists can perform hearing screenings, or you can take the hearing screening results from the nurse, or if the child has already had an audiological evaluation, look at the results and go off them. So there are many kinds of treatments. The nutshell is the best treatment is the one that works best for one particular client or patient, because some techniques might work for some person, they might not work with another. So there's a variety of techniques. But again, you are encouraged to explore what works best for that particular client that you have. So there are articulation-based approaches, for example. They focus on teaching the movements, motor movements for the sounds. Or you get the child and they practice, say for example, the R sound, fry. Now make a sentence with it. I like French fries. Give me a French fry, please. And so repeat, constantly trying, having different words that have the target sounds, and having the child make say words and say sentences and describe pictures and tell stories using these particular words. And the more they use that, the more that they establish the phonological representations in their brain, so that they can produce the sounds more accurately and more predictably. The phonological approaches tend to do a lot with discrimination. For example, that is a basic level, like when you know that a child doesn't know the difference between bid and bed, for example. You have to build it. If they don't know the difference between share and chair, you have to have them listen to pairs of words that are only different in that. And you say to them, tell me, are these words the same or different? Cat, catch. Are they the same or different? You shouldn't have them see your mouth because they will get clues. Share, chair, log, dog. Are they the same or different? And then you do practice like this so that they can build the ability to distinguish one sound from another. That's called phonological discrimination or phonological awareness. And based on that, once you do that, then you focus on production after that. So, and where do you provide intervention? Basically, the prevention, it can be provided to children who are, once they turn 3, early intervention is responsible for them. That means the school district is responsible for them. And then they contact people to provide either in a preschool or at home sometimes. Also, the services can be provided in the preschool itself. That can be provided at the school, but the town in any case is responsible for providing these services. Can be provided in private practice or rehab settings. That's for adults or older, like for older children. And also mostly the adults, of course, will receive it in private practice or hospitals or rehab centers. So, speech sound disorders, again, when we speak about them, we focus on phonemes, that the sounds, how they are said, and we use minimal pairs in the treatment to develop phonological representations of the sounds that the child has difficulty with, or, as a matter of fact, older child or adult. Phonology, again, focuses on the rules that are used to sequence sounds to form syllables and words. Articulation focuses more or has to do more with muscular, when the two muscles or more come together to make one sound or more articulation. We said delay and a speech sound delay. That's the problem with the sound is similar to the speech is similar to the speech of a child who is younger. It means that the error patterns are similar to those made by a younger child. A disorder it involves more sounds. The problem is more severe. The problem is it involves multiple errors in the word usually. Phonological process is a faulty way of saying words or particulars, saying words when the child is unable to produce these particular sounds. It's approximations. So children who are normally developing, they go through phonological processes, they get the closest approximation to what is normal. And these processes, when they continue beyond the developmental age, we call them phonological processes. So typically they involve multiple errors in a word, and they affect a whole cluster, a whole group of sounds in one family of sounds. Like all nasals could be affected, all stop sounds, or all fricative sounds could be affected, and so on. So when they are present, it means that the problem is severe. And it depends again on the number of phonological processes, and each process is a pattern. It affects whole categories. Everywhere the word comes, or everywhere the particular sounds come, that is going to cause multiple errors. The functional speech disorders, the idea is that for most cases we don't understand the reason, we do not know why, but like I said, if you dig deeper into the causality, you'll find that hearing is a major part that is there. The only difference is that by the time the child comes to you to diagnose them, then there's no hearing middle ear infections anymore. Because the child has developed, better mechanisms to deal with infections, like the ear canal is bigger, the eustachian tube is functioning better, and so on. So they come to you, there is no evidence of middle ear infections, yet they have a problem. But if you go back to in their history, you might discover that they had multiple middle ear infections. We spoke about the perceptual versus structural. Perceptual means a problem with perceptual causes could be like hearing or anything that may make the sounds not internalized correctly in the brain, versus anatomic, like say cleft palate, a cleft lip. Directly, it is due to the motor problem the child, the organic problem that the child has, say with a cleft lip, for example, or having a frenulum attachment here, a tongue tie, for example. This will have a direct effect, or motor problems like, weakness due to neurological problems. Again, when we do the assessment, our goal is to identify the sound and the sound patterns that the child has difficulty with. And we list them and say how they are made, how exactly the pattern of error is repeated. And then we use that as a way to look at the treatment, and we make broad lines for treatment. And then from after the evaluation, then you proceed with the treatment. So we said the intervention or the treatment is provided in multiple settings, beginning from preschool, and that becomes mandatory. So that's it for speech sound disorders. In grad school, you are going to have a whole class in grad school called speech sound disorders. So I hope that this lecture has explained to you in a nutshell what speech sound disorders are and how they are diagnosed and how they are treated. And thank you.